The story of the invasion. The Sauri are a species of sentient quadrupeds with a catfish-like face and body. Around 1.5 meters tall and 2 meters long, they can breathe both in water and air, but prefer an environment of air because it is much easier for them to move around, considering they do not have fins. Their skin is made of very strong scales, which can withstand great amounts of pressure. They live around 10 to 14 kilometers underground, and as they evolved, they made huge cave-like areas, which they would use as a habitat and a place to build things, because for some reason, they had an instinct for building, which is also bolstered by the fact that they could climb walls with their quadruped limbs, and survived off eating rocks and absorbing the minerals within them, while also making it into a cement-like excrement. As time progressed, larger caves and buildings were made, scientific advances, and now the Sauri live in huge utopian-looking cities, lit up by many lights of varying colors. Their cities sprawl more than 5,000 kilometers in every direction, with the city located at around every 60 kilometers or so, with the average height of a city being around 1 kilometer. Most of the cities have around 2 million Sauri living there, and there are always projects going on for building new things. The Sauri aren't very territorial, but if threatened or attacked by another, they usually fight fiercely until the other surrenders. After the fight is over, it is tradition for the losing side to give the winner a part of the properties they have built. If they don't, they get killed. All of this would happen in close combat with no weapons, because the Sauri never really made any advances in weapons, only architecture and better manufacturing processes. Nothing really new was happening with the species for a while, until some commotion happened when a city unexpectedly started experiencing tremors, and suddenly a hole appeared on the side of a wall of the cave where the city of Castor was. A strange creature limped in, and a few citizens of Castor came up to it, and it just fell down and lay there motionless. Behind it was an interesting structure, which seemed to be partly embedded in the wall, and water was leaking into it. Both the creature and structure were taken into the city for examination, as repair crews swiftly closed the hole from which water was leaking. Examining the creature, it was like nothing they saw before. The Sauri never really had much contact with many species except worms, certain bugs, and deep-sea fish. This new creature was incredibly fascinating. Having 4 limbs like them, but seemingly it would, instead of walking on all 4 limbs, walk on only 2. The structure it came out of was made of a crude material, and was visibly very affected by the pressure. But the design of it made no sense to them, as it wasn't that large in comparison to their structures, but the engineering seemingly made it be able to move much faster in water than they could move just while swimming by themselves. The Sauri decided to repair the structure and try its effectiveness in water. They wanted to keep mostly the same design it had before, and they were able to repair it, but finding out the controls of this thing was nearly impossible to them, and they mostly did it with the help of trial and error, during which they accidentally used one of the leftover torpedoes and blew up a whole building. They thought it was a storage unit of some kind. There was another storage unit like it, and they documented all of its characteristics, and took it out of the structure. Now confident that it has been fixed and understand most of the controls, the first mission was about to commence. A port into the ocean was made where the structure arrived, and the Sauri hoped to find more of these creatures by traveling with their structure. The mission was underway, and going up, they started a turbo on the structure and got launched out of the ocean with the momentum of 5,184 kilometers an hour, leaping out of the water looking like a missile. And the Chinese Navy saw the ship and began firing immediately, and the submarine was blown up. The Sauri were awaiting the return of their crew, but a week passed and they still weren't back. This, of course, was news spread all around the Sauri civilization, because a new species that seemed intelligent was discovered. A month passed, and the Sauri decided to make 2 more structures, now with a modified design to go search for the missing crew. The modifications were mostly a structural upgrade, making it 15 times sturdier than the last design. They also decided to call it a vehicle rather than a structure anymore, since it seemed just like a vehicle, but for water. After 1 week, they finished the 2 vehicles and again went on a mission. Both of the vehicles launched out of the ocean like missiles again, because they didn't know that would happen. And immediately they were targeted by the Chinese and Japanese nuclear submarines and destroyers. Within a minute of launching out of the ocean, the sorry ships were under heavy attack and sustained heavy damage. One was already destroyed and the other managed to submerge. The sorry ship was heavily damaged, and within 2 minutes of submerging, they were found and destroyed. Again, the sorry lost more crews and didn't know what had happened, so this time they made 10 ships and went again. The crews were told to be very cautious and not to use the turbo unless needing to escape. The ships communicated through the communication systems within the submarines. Coming up at around 2 kilometers below the surface, they were attacked. 8 ships were destroyed, 1 was left heavily damaged and dead in the water, while 1 that was slightly damaged engaged the turbo and went back to the port as fast as they could. The report on the incident went as followed. Our vehicles were attacked by similar lurking ships, but with explosive devices that destroyed our vehicles within minutes. 8 vehicles were destroyed, and when we engaged the turbo, the one that was left was afloat, not responding and heavily damaged. We need some way of defending ourselves. This was very worrisome for the sorry. The creatures that made these vehicles seemed extremely hostile. Now the news of this was spreading like wildfire, and the newest models were equipped with very volatile explosive materials, similar to the storage units the original one had that destroyed a building. The structural integrity was also upgraded to the most advanced the sorry had. Whole production lines made 100 of these ships equipped with torpedoes within 1 week. The mission was going to be to find and destroy the ships that destroyed their ships. Meanwhile, on the surface, the Chinese government towed the submarine that was heavily damaged and found 50 huge catfish-like creatures dead inside the submarine. The submarine itself had incredibly advanced armor and a propulsion system that was only rumored to be possible. As the discovery of a possible new advanced sentient species happened, rumors spread quickly that humans aren't the only intelligent species on Earth. Somebody posted pictures of the alleged species, and the news spread wide and far. The sorry search and destroy mission started, and suddenly the Chinese saw more ships coming their way, except this time they were in formation, and there were a lot of them. A fight broke out, and the Chinese Navy wasn't really even able to dent the ships with normal torpedoes. The Navy had few working nuclear missiles, but they used them to inflict massive damage to the attacking fleet, wiping out 75 of the ships, but the remaining ones destroyed the rest of the Chinese fleet. Now, this fight was very obvious to the rest of the world, and war by China, Japan, Russia, and many more Asian nations against the USA and NATO was halted for the moment. Fighting stopped with the news of a new threat to the human race. Intel about the new species was shared between governments, and it was found out that the design of the ship was from an experimental ship tested by the USA that started the war in the first place, after a rogue captain stole it and spread terror to the east coast of Asia. The location where the ships appeared was deep beneath the Mariana Trench, in the Challenger's Deep. The sorry went into full-on production of the ships, and now 500 cities were working on massive navies to deploy, whilst the human race on the surface was preparing the coastal Asian nations for tsunamis, as the plan was to nuke the Mariana Trench to hell. Now, the sorry were deploying thousands of ships out of the trench, and with a hasty decision it was decided now was the time to strike. While not very ready to defend from the ensuing tsunamis, the sorry fleet was annihilated, along with the city of Castor and many others. The humans thought they had eradicated the threat, but the problem had just begun, destroying nearly 400 cities of the sorry. Now the show began, and fleets of thousands of ships were emerging from the water every 2 days. Bombing them every time they came up was not the best idea, but the humans continued, and every time more and more ships started emerging. First it was 1, then 2, then 10, then 100. Now per 10,000 ships were emerging all over the oceans. The bombing of coastlines was constant, but when it came to land combat, humans were much more powerful, having rifles, tanks, and much more. People would mow down the landings of Sari extremely easily, but nobody knew how many Sari there were to have this massive of an invasion. Turns out that Sari outnumber humans around 222 to 1. Weeks are passing and incredible amounts of human resources are being used to combat the Sari, as they are occupying many islands near Asia and have a fierce battle with the Philippine, Japanese, and Chinese peoples. And that was the story of the invasion. Find out next time on the story of Totors the Mountain Man, how long the human race will last, and who will prevail.